What am I trying to say here? I want to talk to you about the LUMIX S9. I kind of wanted to wait until the whole storm blew over from a few weeks ago and sort of wait for that all to sort of settle down. And especially now, since I managed to get my hands on the camera to see what all the fuss was about. This isn't going to be a full review. I didn't have the camera long enough. LUMIX would only give me the camera for about a week, which is definitely not long enough to give you sort of definitive opinions on this camera. I'm not going to tell you to buy this camera. I'm not going to tell you to not buy this camera. It's not what this video is about. But I know I have a sort of sizable LUMIX audience as part of this channel. And a few people have commented on my last video asking about what I thought about this camera. So that's what this video is going to be. It's going to be a bit of a dump of my thoughts. Nothing too fancy. And I think before we get into this, I should probably just talk a little bit about my relationship with Panasonic. So I'm not a brand ambassador. I don't work with them. I don't work for them. I am a professional filmmaker. I shoot on all kinds of cameras, whatever the job or the client wants, not just LUMIX cameras. But I have predominantly over the years owned Panasonic LUMIX cameras. So I have an EVA 1, a GH4, an S5, and S5 2X. So I like Panasonic cameras. I've gone back to them, but I use all sorts of cameras. I shot on Sonys and Canons and also own a Red Komodo. I wasn't even involved in the launch of the S9. I didn't even know it was coming. I didn't have any sort of pre-launch briefing on it. I wasn't invited to Japan, and LUMIX didn't even offer to send me one for review. I actually got in touch with them after I saw it came out because I wanted to make a stupid video, which will be linked somewhere here. And that's the only reason I got my hands on an S9. They have sent me stuff in the past to review, but I don't think I'm like on the top of their priority list for marketing or anything like that. I don't think the S9 is a bad camera. It's certainly a confusing camera, and I think that's what makes it interesting for me, because it's kind of like this weird Frankenstein thing that sort of does lots of things that other cameras don't do, and then doesn't do any things that other cameras do. And when you try and compare it to one camera that it is supposedly stacked up against, it is missing lots of important things, but then has loads of extra things that that camera doesn't have. So yeah, it's a very confusing little thing. It's definitely capable of shooting professional grade images, and I think that's kind of wild in a camera of that form factor. Like, I don't think we've seen something this powerful with this many pro features in the form factor of that size, which makes it interesting to me, right? But you know, as you will have seen, it does lack certain things. Whether they're important to you is up to you. Basically a mini S5 II, and that's come with a few compromises. So it has record limits because it doesn't have an internal fan. It has lack of I/O, so a mini HDMI, no headphone ports. It has no EVF, it has an electronic shutter. But to counter that, it also has all these crazy features, like it has the industry-leading IBIS that we've seen on these cameras. It can shoot 6K open gate. It has the great autofocus and autofocus improvements that came with the new firmware. Obviously comes with an L mount with a great range of lenses. It has a huge range of recording options and bit rates and resolutions and frame rates too. And also has these amazing anamorphic features, as I showed off last week. It's kind of wild in a camera of this size. So the next thing is, like, does it need all this stuff? And that's, you know, where I get confused. I don't know. Like, and do the people who are going to buy this need that stuff? Like, would they have been better stripping some of this stuff out and making it a lot cheaper? Because I think the price is part of the reason why there was so much sort of, I don't know, rage and outcry and sort of part of this bizarre circus around launch. Like, who really is the target audience of this camera? Maybe there's a problem in that we are just sort of like lumping people into these groups of hobbyist content creators and filmmakers, and maybe the reality is that the definitions between these groups of people is actually quite blurred, and that's what this camera kind of represents in a way. It's not a cheap camera. It's priced, you know, around the similar price as a full-fledged S5 II. You know, if it was around 800 or 900 pound mark, then I probably would have snapped one up. So give me a sec. Just yesterday, I picked up this. So this is the Fujifilm X100V. It's my first Fuji camera. I'll probably make a video about it soon, but I'm going on holiday next week and I wanted a stills only camera, but I paid £1,250 for this and it's used, okay? This camera can only shoot 8-bit It has very limited video, it has no IBIS, and it has a fixed lens. So, you know, it's difficult comparing these cameras because this thing has stuff that the S9 doesn't, and the S9 has a load of stuff that this doesn't. 4-year-old camera, £1,200, but it has an EVF, but it's got a mechanical shutter as well. So that's confusing, right? Because if you're saying that the S9 is too expensive, then also this has to be too expensive because it's a 4-year-old camera that costs £1,200. So that's, you know, again, it's confusing because I think people have sort of focused in on what it can't do, which, you know, aren't insignificant. And I think that's what I'm going to talk about next in terms of its stills capabilities. But I think they've focused a lot on the record limits, the lack of mechanical shutter, and the lack of EVF. And they've basically said it's disgusting that we're selling a camera that lacks these features. But it can still shoot decent stills and it can still shoot amazing video. Yeah, so it's confusing. I'm confused. But I don't think it's a bad camera. Maybe that's the title of this video, but I don't think it's a bad camera. So stills. The S9. So as I said, I took it away. It was my mum's birthday, so we were traveling a lot. I had a professional shoot up north and then went on to North Yorkshire for that. And I brought the S9 with me, and I also brought the little DJI Osmo Pocket 3 with me. And my intention was to use the S9 to capture stills throughout that weekend, because I thought it'd be a fun little camera to capture stills on. And I didn't feel like picking it up lots. I didn't feel like shooting lots of stills on it. And I think that's because I kind of really like taking stills on my phone, but I don't like the quality of them, but I like the ease of use of it. And I think for family stuff, when I'm catching stuff like that, I don't necessarily want an interchangeable bulky lens camera to take pictures. And that's why I bought one of these for my holiday next week. It's simple, and I just want to take simple pictures. So when I was using the S9, I used it with the 18mm lens, and I thought I was going to be papping photos all week and it would, you know, reignite my love for stills, but it just didn't. And I don't think that's anything to do with electronic or mechanical shutter. That didn't bother me at all. It was never a problem with the stills I took. This has an electronic shutter, never been a problem. But I think it was the lack of EVF or optical viewfinder that bothered me. And that surprised me because I didn't think it was going to bother me. But the moment I started using it, I just didn't love having to look at this little screen to take pictures. Now maybe I'm old school and old fashioned, and maybe if I got this camera and stuck with it for a bit longer, I'm sure I would get used to it and overcome that. But I was out shooting in bright daylight and I was squinting a lot, and I just found that I wanted to put the camera up to my face and use it in that way. And I think the other thing that's confusing is that it's designed like a rangefinder camera, right? It looks like one of these, and when you hold one of these, you want to put it up to your eye. You know, when I saw all these videos coming out with people saying it's got no EVF, I was like, oh, shut up, it's not a big deal. You know, it's one little element. But for stills stuff, unless the camera is tiny, you know, like a little Ricoh GR3 or something like that, I really want an EVF. And that's actually something that put me off buying the Ricoh GR3. So when I went to look at the camera shop yesterday and buy this, I looked at the Ricoh and I went for this because it's got a viewfinder. So for me personally, I like that tactile interaction with a stills camera. And like I said, I could live with it, but if I was buying the S9 for stills, I would want an EVF. The S9 isn't a camera that does any one thing perfectly, and it isn't pitched at doing one of those things perfectly. I think it's confusing because they designed it like a rangefinder stills camera, and it isn't a rangefinder stills camera, and maybe that's also fed into the controversy. And I think the other thing is kind of confusing when they launched it is that they didn't launch it with any sort of small pancake lenses. They did launch it actually with the f8 manual focus pancake lens, which looks kind of fun actually. Like, I don't hate that lens, I don't hate the idea of it like other people do, but I do think it was strange releasing this rangefinder style camera without any small sort of compact lenses to go with it, with autofocus. So that was confusing. But I still don't think the S9 is a bad camera, just confusing. So there are offerings from Sigma that I've seen other reviewers mention over the week, and I think if you pick those up, that would solve that problem. So not a huge problem, but I do think, you know, as the brand has launched this camera, why didn't they launch it with those lenses, and use it to sell those lenses? I don't know. Again, it's confusing. I'm always a bit skeptical when camera brands launch these sort of new apps. You see so many things like this. Are they going to be a gimmick? Is it going to get long-term support? Because what ends up happening is a bunch of people start relying on it and start loving it, and the company stops supporting it and kills it off in 5 years' time because it didn't have enough popularity or uptake. So I'm always a bit skeptical when I see stuff like this. I hope LUMIX are able to capitalize on this and push it and make it a popular and easy to use thing. But the concepts of it I love. So one of the other things that, drew me to a camera like this is its simplicity and be able to shoot JPEGs and get these sort of film recipes, so you can pull JPEG straight off the camera and they look good and ready to go and share on social media and stuff. And I guess that's LUMIX's answer to this. And I had a play with it and they're great, yeah. And the fact that you can get these libraries, sync them with your phone and sync them to camera, I think is a fantastic innovation. And I really hope they bring it to the S5 too, because I would genuinely love to use it. And I also really love the degree of control that they gave over that and the ability to tweak it, the strength of it, mess around and stuff like that. That was fantastic. So no complaints there. And I do genuinely think it is a great feature and innovation. I just hope over the long term it's something LUMIX can develop and support. So how bad are the limitations? So the record limits, I think that is one of the ones I've heard the most. I don't think this camera is designed for people who are going to be out shooting long form documentaries. But the flip side is that it can be used for that, right? So like when I had 29-minute record limits, you just re-trigger record during the interviewer's question. It was never a problem. I've never lost anything due to a record limit. The fact that it can shoot all these incredible resolutions, the fact that it's got open gate, if you are a content creator, especially someone like me, right? When I'm using a camera, I'm using the S5 2X or the Komodo, and when I'm shooting sample footage, I'm shooting, 10, 20-second long clips. When I made my last video and went out with the S9 shooting anamorphic, was not a problem, didn't run up against it once. I think, LUMIX have been fairly forthright with this, whereas like previous releases from Sony didn't put record limits on and they overheated. And for me, that would be a much bigger problem, not knowing when the camera would shut down if I was using it in a professional setting, than knowing that I was safe for 15 minutes and that I was always going to be safe. So different people are going to have different concerns over that. I feel like this is the more professional route to do it. Give you the information, give you the limitations up front, know what you're working with and how to work around them. So the dad cam theory. So a few people have mentioned this to me and I think this is interesting. So there is a group of users, I'm not saying that the whole camera is designed for them, I think this is designed for content creators as well, but there's this group of users who are sort of enthusiasts. They're into tech, they keep up with the latest announcements and releases. They maybe have families or friends or social events, and they want to capture them with a piece of state-of-the-art tech, which I think the S9 is. They're not recording interviews, but they're capturing stills. They like to have a few lenses. They like to shoot in 4K and play around with affordable anamorphics. And I think the S9 is absolutely perfect for that use case. I think one of the main points was the price. A lot of people saw a camera and looked straight at the limitations and wondered why the hell would they price a camera this much that can't, shoot more than 15 minutes of video. But going back to my previous point of this, when you think about this and the LUMIX S5 2X, it's kind of sat comfortably in between them. So it kind of makes sense in price. And yes, if you are a professional video shooter, it probably isn't a camera you're going to be relying on for professional work. And I think that feeds into the thing that I think caused a lot of controversy, is that we're reaching the end of the sort of latest generation of cameras, like the FX6s, the first S1H. And I think people are ready for a flagship, and especially in the sort of Panasonic LUMIX community, they're sort of, on tenterhooks, on the edge of their seats, waiting for Panasonic to announce some new flagship. And I think, everyone got hints of people being sent to Japan. We got wind that there was going to be a new camera announcement. If they're sending people to Japan to promote this new camera, it must be a big one, right? And suddenly they announced the S9, and it wasn't this sort of flagship professional video camera that everyone was hoping for, and the top of the bottle just popped off and people just, you know, started laying into it. I've got no problem with people having an opinion on a camera. I'm not going to tell you what to think about a camera. I think it's perfectly acceptable to not like a camera and to voice your reasons for not liking it. I don't think we as YouTubers should knock people down for that. I don't think it should just be us that are allowed to have opinions about cameras. But I was maybe a little bit alarmed or amused maybe at the degree of mania that went down over this little tiny camera. You know, a lot of people are sort of saying this camera is going to be a complete failure, it's going to be a flop, and that's where I disagree with these people, because I think this camera is going to sell very well. And I think people forget that the Facebook communities and the YouTube communities are a tiny bubble of the market. Like, people like me and people with channels 4 times, 10 times the size of mine, they have influence, but they only have a certain share of influence over a certain share of the market. There are going to be hundreds and thousands of people buying this camera who have never heard of some of these YouTubers, who have no knowledge of any of this controversy, who will see a small compact camera that has some state-of-the-art features and they'll want to buy it. So I don't think LUMIX have got a flop on their hands. I think when you break this camera down and try to tear it apart from the perspective of a professional, it is a very confusing camera. Me personally, I don't think it's a bad camera. I just think it's a confusing camera. And I think that gets into my final point, right? Will I personally buy one? And I don't think I will, for a few reasons. And it's not because I think it's a bad camera, it's just because I already have an S5 2X, and that does all the things that the S9 does, and it does it brilliantly. But as I mentioned, I'm going on holiday next week and I wanted a stills focused camera. The S9 hasn't been released, so I couldn't buy that. I wanted something that got me away from video and moving image, because I do that 24/7, 7 days a week, both for my professional work and for this on YouTube. And I want something that brings me away from that. I want something that allows me to shoot stills with no friction. And the more I looked around, the more something like this was a better use for me on my little holiday than something like the S9. Now, had the S9 released, you know, around the £800 and £900 mark, I would have snapped that thing up straight away. You know, maybe would have even paid £1,000 for it. That would have been the camera for me for everyday stuff. But because it is a little bit more expensive, and because I have an S5 2X, it doesn't really make sense for me. I think it is a nice sort of everyday camera for shooting small amounts of video, you know, maybe in a non-professional thing, or for shooting content for YouTube, doing product videography, capturing my B-roll, testing lenses. I think the S9 would be a fantastic camera for that. Something that's small that I can chuck in a bag, I can take around with me, I can test out the latest lenses, I can, you know, shoot behind the scenes on professional jobs. The S9 is a fantastic camera for that. And that's what makes it confusing. It's confusing, it's interesting, but it's not a bad camera. So I think I've been rambling for a long time now. Should you buy an S9? I don't know, I can't tell you that. I get so many questions. Should I buy this? Should I buy that? I can never tell you what to buy. What I know is there are going to be a lot of people who buy this camera who are never going to watch a video like this, and they're going to be very happy. I think you can sit and you can moan and you can complain about a camera, but it's not going to change anything. It's not going to get you the perfect camera. And at the end of the day, these cameras are just tools. You can have your opinion on your camera, we can have a debate about it, but I don't think anyone should be losing sleep over a camera release. They're tools, they're things we use for different reasons. Some people use them to make money, some people use them to capture memories. The S9 is capable of doing both of those things, and it's going to be a good camera for some people and a not so good camera for other people. So that's my thoughts on it. I don't really have strong opinions about it. It's a confusing camera, but it's not a bad camera. Thanks for watching. I'm Ed. Until next time, I'll see you later.